All right, this is going to be the first in a series of videos I'm going to do about my life a little bit. I think just because I want to document it, and I have some interesting stories I think to tell, and some things about myself maybe some people don't know. And so, yeah, this is my first in this series. I'm going to tell from my perspective as I see it. I'm sure that anyone involved might have a different perspective or remember it differently, and that's totally fine. I don't really care. I'm just going to tell it as I remember it and as I see it and as I understand it. And I guess that's part of how that works, and that's okay. So, this one, people don't really know this, but I have a role to play in the reason why BYU and generally the church has baby changing stations in their bathrooms. Back in the late 1990s, I was a student at BYU and served on the Student Advisory Council. One day I read an editorial in the Daily Universe. There were a series of these over time. Students were complaining not only that there weren't changing stations on campus, but but there was also controversy about people, seeing others change their babies, um, on the floor and in random places, and they're like, why are you changing your kid on the floor? And there was a big controversy about it for a little while. Anyway, it may not sound like a small. It may sound like a small thing to a lot of people, but BYU has a lot of married students, and people were bringing their babies to campus. Dads were literally changing, diapers on bathroom floors, couches, wherever they could find space, and not everybody was happy with it. Well, I happen to know something that most people didn't, and that was I had worked at the Montiel Bean Life Science Museum for what 2.5 years maybe, and I knew that there were baby change stations in that museum, and something just made me start wondering, well, if they're okay there, why don't we have them everywhere else? Why is it in there and we don't have it? And that doesn't make any sense to me. So as I dug into it, I learned that years earlier, the university and the church in general had stopped installing them because of liability concerns. The understanding was that the manufacturers of the baby changing stations weren't willing to stand behind the product if something failed. And because of that, there was a policy against putting them in most campus buildings and in churches. Well, that explanation didn't sit right to me. It was, the late 90s, and I thought, that doesn't make any sense to me. That should be something that's not an issue anymore. So I did a lot of what I've always done in my life. I started making phone calls and digging into it and going after it. So I tracked down the company that made the many of the baby station changing stations, which is Koala, and eventually got connected with one of their vice presidents. I basically had sent them a message saying, "Hey, this is Adam Clark. I'm from Brigham Young University, and we're looking at putting baby changing stations throughout the campus and possibly into the church. We'd like to have a conversation about this." He doesn't know what my role is. It's not a lie. It was just I was trying to get a conversation. Well, they responded for sure, and so that was really cool. And he said to me, he said, "Well, we do cover liability. That's not been an issue for a long time. I just don't know if you guys have ever really looked into it." So the moment I heard that, I realized the original reason for the policy no longer existed. So I put together a proposal and I brought it to the Student Advisory Council. And at the time, we were doing tons of construction on campus, so there was a great opportunity here to put it into these new bathrooms as before they got put into place permanently. Then I took this proposal, went to the Student Advisory Council. It passed. Everybody really liked the proposal. Then the proposal then goes to the student body president, who at the time was Dallin Anderson, for approval before moving on to the university administration. And that's where it got interesting, because Dallin, the student body president, rejected it, basically vetoed it, said he wasn't going to take it. The reasoning, as he explained to me, was that it was considered a church policy issue, and student government wasn't supposed to challenge or try and change church policy. That's not how we're going to go about things. And I basically said to him, I don't agree with you. And he said, leave it alone. I did not. So I thought we were correcting an outdated assumption. So not just a policy. And so I figured uh, I was going to keep going. So I reached out directly to Ed Cousins. He was the head of VP of facilities. Uh, uh, I don't remember what the exact name of it, but all the physical facilities for the university. He was awesome, by the way. Ed Cousins is one of my favorite administrators I ever worked with at BYU, and I've worked with most of them at some point in my career there. But I showed him the research. I explained what I learned. I showed him my proposal, and I connected him with the vice president from Qualit. In fact, Ed immediately understood the opportunity and thought it was awesome, especially since the university is constantly constructing and renovating buildings and new buildings and stuff. So if the liability issue had been solved, there was no reason not to include the changing stations moving forward. Well, Ed and I actually got in a call together in his office with the VP at Koala and confirmed what I had already discussed. He asked him to send over a proposal and to get with one of his team or whatever, to come up with a proposal, which then Ed later took to the president's council of the university, where it received approval. Now, at that, what's funny, and by the way, from that time forward, baby changing stations began appearing across campus. They got put into new all the men's and women's restrooms, especially ground floors, where accessibility to the street was the highest. That was kind of the priority first, and into churches as well. That policy kind of trickled into the church. Well, the funny part was that the same uh, president who had blocked the proposal happened to be in that president's council, because they invited him into the president's council at time. I don't know if it was every meeting, but he was in that one, and saw that that proposal had gotten through, and Ed Cousins had mentioned my name and given me credit. And so let's just say I got a very strong lecture about chains of command and proper procedure from the student body president. But what always mattered to me wasn't who got credit. It was whether the problem got solved. That's always my way of being. And I know that my methods sometimes seem that I'm trying to get attention or kind of do things because I think I'm right. It's just really about the thing. Are we accomplishing the right thing? And so I pushed forward and got it solved. And so 30 years later, parents of BYU are still using those changing stations. People at churches are still using changing stations, and most of them have no idea how they got there. And that's fine. And honestly, it really doesn't bother me. But the point was never recognition. The point was that one day, the next dad and the next mom wouldn't have to change diaper on the bathroom floor or on a couch. And looking back, I realized the story isn't really about baby changing stations. It's about something I tried to do throughout my life. When I see a problem and I have a way to improve it for others, I try to understand the real reason it exists, and then try and go about fixing it. Sometimes the biggest changes start with something as ordinary as a dad needing a place to change his baby's diaper. And I've never been afraid to take up causes, to go push, to ask the questions, and when appropriate, back down. But a lot of times we put things in place and we don't have a good reason for it. And so that's just kind of a good story that illustrates a lot of the kind of person I am, I think. And if my kids ever needed a good way of explaining to people something about me, this tells that story. And those who know me know this is pretty typical of how I am. I'm just glad we solved a problem that was needed on that campus. That today, many people will benefit from it. And every time I go back to campus and I use the restrooms and I see a baby changing station, I smile and I think I did something good. And that's pretty awesome.